If the Lord is beginningless, endless, and blissful, then so too are we at our core. In fact, it's only because of misidentification with this material body that we think ourselves finite and subject to things like birth and death. Welcome to Chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita in our multi-part series. Let's jump right into it. Om Ajnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. So when we left Arjuna, he was observing his opponents on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, seeing so many friends, relatives, and well-wishers on the opposing side. He was in great distress. Okay, text 1 of Chapter 2. Sanjaya said, seeing Arjuna full of compassion, his mind depressed, his eyes full of tears, Madhusudan, Krishna, spoke the following words. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, My dear Arjuna, how have these impurities come upon you? They are not at all befitting a man who knows the value of life. They lead not to higher planets, but to infamy. And so Krishna wastes no time here. He's immediately coming at Arjuna and telling him about the incorrectness of his present view. Although Arjuna spoke passionately about high-minded virtues, Krishna has the perspective to understand that Arjuna's concerns are, more than anything, a mask for his fears. Quitting the battlefield at this crucial juncture will not lead to good consequences, but rather to infamy. Text 3. O son of Pritha, do not yield to this degrading impotence. It does not become you. Give up such petty weakness of heart, and arise, O chastiser of the enemy. So Krishna just referred to Arjuna as the son of Pritha. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments that this is very important. This is a purposeful thing that he's just done here. What he's doing is he's reminding Arjuna of the bravery of his father and suggests in a not so subtle way that his current behavior is simply cowardice and not becoming of someone from a valiant lineage of warriors. And so with that in mind, you might argue that, okay, Arjuna's motive to give up the battle is not cowardice, but compassion. It is not correct behavior to attack one's own teachers or warriors who are inferior to oneself, as Arjuna's opponents on the battlefield mostly are. To this, Krishna simply argues that to refuse to fight in this circumstance is not compassion, but rather confusion. It's the ignorance of a weak mind. Okay, text 4. Arjuna said, O killer of enemies, O killer of Madhu, how can I counterattack with arrows in battle men like Bhishma and Drona who are worthy of my worship? It's the opinion of several Vaishnava commentators that when Arjuna refers to Krishna as killer of enemies in this previous verse, he's suggesting that Krishna has killed many opponents in the name of justice in his own time. But he's never been faced with killing his own guru, the situation in which Arjuna now finds himself. Okay, text 5. It would be better to live in this world by begging than to live at the cost of the lives of great souls who are my teachers. Even though desiring worldly gain, they are superiors. If they are killed, everything we enjoy will be tainted with blood. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments here that in ancient India, it was considered abominable for warriors like Arjuna to subsist on begging. Such acts were the purview of mendicants and wandering sages. Thus, Arjuna is willing to take on a degree of shame and ostracism that would be unimaginable to most warriors just to avoid killing his relatives. He sees no point either in the fame and wealth he'll attain by winning this battle. He's thinking to himself, maybe I'll have all of this attainment, all of this fame, glory, wealth, but how can I possibly enjoy it when all my loved ones will be deceased? Okay, he goes on, nor do we know which is better, conquering them or being conquered by them. If we killed the sons of Dhritarashtra, we should not care to live. Yet they are now standing before us on the battlefield. In war, there's always some kind of loss, even for the victors. Arjuna is considering that even a victory for his side would be equal to defeat. For one who's survived a battle, yet cares not for life in its aftermath, has victory truly been achieved? And yet, if Arjuna were able to rise above his confusion and depression, he would be able to understand that his own conquest of the Kauravas and the final dashing of their destructive plans would certainly be better. Once again, Arjuna is focused primarily on his own feelings of discomfort rather than what would undoubtedly be the best thing for the broader society. And so it's interesting here because Even if we never find ourselves making life and death decisions involving entire kingdoms, it's not difficult to empathize with Arjuna's situation. How many times are we confronted with difficult choices, uncomfortable circumstances, and painful sacrifices that must be confronted? And how many times do we run from those things thinking, at least let me put it off for another day? For Arjuna, that day has come when it can no longer be put off. And for us, that day will inevitably come as well. Arjuna continues, now I'm confused about my duty and have lost all composure because of miserly weakness. Miserly weakness. He's kind of getting an inkling of a sense that he's being a bit selfish here. He says, in this condition, I am asking you to tell me for certain what is best for me. Now I am your disciple and a soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me. And so based on that reply, Krishna's brief response to Arjuna's monologue seems to have had some effect on him. Arjuna's last few comments have demonstrated a subtly shifting mindset in which he goes from accusing Krishna of not understanding his plight to questioning whether victory might be worse than defeat, and finally, to recognizing his own bewilderment and weakness. Actually, Arjuna is demonstrating the first signs of qualification for accepting a guru. He understands his actual position, not as the master of his own individual universe, but as a lost soul in need of guidance. And just as it happens for many of us, it takes a cataclysm the likes of which he's never encountered to shake him from his illusion and prompt him to seek the shelter of someone wiser than himself. When ordinary people encounter cataclysms, they often take shelter of distractions, intoxicants, entertainment, or any number of other things that take the mind away from a confrontation of the actual position we're in. Because these responses provide only temporary or insufficient relief, while at the same time distracting oneself from the yogic practices that will bring lasting peace, they are understood to be ultimately undesirable and self-defeating. Yet despite the fact that our problems reappear as soon as the distractions have dissipated, we turn to these methods of relief again and again, not realizing their negative effects. Arjuna, however, should be understood to be a dedicated devotee of the Lord. As is demonstrated here, when he encounters distress, he eventually takes shelter of Lord Krishna, who bestows peace on the mind. Through steady practice and determination, any practitioner of yoga can gradually attain the purity of mind necessary to take shelter of the Lord in all circumstances, and thus conquer fear. But as Tripurari Maharaj comments, Krishna does not immediately reply to Arjuna's request. It's as if he's trying to test his resolve. He allows Arjuna to continue speaking. The Guru, too, may at times test our resolve. It's one thing to seek guidance at the feet of a qualified spiritual master. It's another thing entirely to have the dedication to practice yoga to the point that it begins to bear fruit. Okay, Arjuna's continuing. He says, I can find no means to drive away this grief which is drying up my senses. I will not be able to dispel it even if I win a prosperous, unrivaled kingdom on earth with sovereignty like the demigods in heaven. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has an interesting commentary here. He says, at this point, Krishna may object to Arjuna's request for guidance by saying, how can I act as your guru? You and I are friends. You have no reverential feelings toward me. Better you should seek the advice of a learned sage like Vyas. And Arjuna's actually anticipating this objection coming from Krishna. So he says that he cannot find any means to drive away his grief. No other learned sage or wise elder is capable of helping him at this moment according to his own estimation. With this expression, he's showing himself willing and ready to truly accept a guru into his life. Okay, text 9. Sanjaya said, having spoken thus, Arjuna, chastiser of enemies, told Krishna, Govinda, I shall not fight. So just a moment ago, Arjuna seemed to be wavering, and now he seems to be back on this notion that he's not going to fight no matter what. What Arjuna's actually saying here is that, oh Krishna, I will not be able to take part in this battle if you do not accept me as your disciple and dispel my confusion. Tripurari Maharaj also comments that Arjuna is inadvertently speaking a profound truth in this moment. In actuality, although he will eventually indeed fight in this battle, Krishna will demonstrate that he will not do anything at all. Rather, he will be an instrument in the hands of the Almighty Lord. Okay, this is still Sanjaya speaking. He says, O descendant of Bharat, at that time Krishna, smiling in the midst of both armies, spoke the following words to the grief-stricken Arjuna. So although Arjuna is experiencing the deepest despair of his life, Krishna is merely smiling, indicating that he has indeed accepted Arjuna as his disciple. And so Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments that Krishna has given up his mood of friendship that prompted him to accuse him of cowardice earlier. Now Krishna has determined to act as Arjuna's guru by expressing calmness and compassion. This is a good demonstration of the difference between these two types of relationships. A friend can push you from the back in a certain sense and say, "Look, man, don't be a wimp. Get out there and do your job." But a guru's place is quite different. When the guru approaches the disciple who's in distress and suffering, the guru will act with compassion, with gentleness, with softness to bring that person gently out of that state. So let's see how Krishna goes about accomplishing that here. Text 11, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, meaning Krishna, said, "While speaking learned words, you are mourning for that which is not worthy of grief. Those who are wise lament neither for the living nor for the dead." Krishna begins his instruction to Arjuna by pointing out the flaw in his reasoning. Arjuna has attempted to appear authoritative by quoting Shastra, but he's not understood one of the most fundamental distinctions upon which Shastra is based. That is, the distinction between matter and spirit. Arjuna is confusing the bodies of his relatives with their actual selves. He's foreseeing the deaths of the bodies of his family members and lamenting that grief yet to come, rather than understanding that their true selves are eternal and incapable of being destroyed. And so Ramanuja reveals the implications of this verse by saying that the self or soul is not dependent on the body for its existence. For the soul, there's neither birth nor death. Therefore, there's no reason to grieve for it. The body, on the other hand, is made of dead matter, and that is only so much accumulation of chemicals and substances and would be completely inert without being suffused with the energy of the eternal soul. For this material body, birth and death are inevitable. Therefore, grieving for its loss or trying in vain to make our lives permanent within these bodies is pointless. But somebody may argue that experiencing grief for the loss of a family member is natural and ought not to be discouraged. For most of us, this is certainly true, and no knowledgeable person would needlessly discourage someone from expressing grief. However, it is to be understood that this need to express grief, though often necessary for conditioned souls like us, is a symptom of material consciousness and ultimately illusion. Okay, but even then, we may sometimes see even highly advanced yogis expressing grief at the loss of the material bodies of their loved ones. This is merely an expression of latent karmas, according to the Vaishnava view. What that means is that the material mind-body complex may continue to act in a conditioned way for some time, even if consciousness is situated in pure knowledge. Just as the operator of a machine observes the actions of the machine, the yogi observes the actions of the mind-body complex, although he's detached from them. Swami Prabhupada gave an interesting example of this one time. He said that it's something like an electric fan being unplugged from the wall. Even though the fan is no longer receiving energy or electricity to turn the blades still turn for some time until the inertia eventually stops them. Similarly, our conditioned activities and thoughts may continue to function even though there's no longer power going into that conditioned state of life. Eventually, those conditioned reactions will cease to function, just as the fan eventually ceases to turn without electricity. Okay, text 12. This is a big one for us in terms of Vaishnava philosophy. It sets the groundwork for the fundamental understanding of the nature of the soul, or at least part of it. Let's see what Krishna says. He says, "Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be." Krishna here is establishing the eternality of the soul. This concept distinguishes the Vedic view from its Christian and Islamic counterparts. Many Christian and Islamic commentators believe that the soul is in fact created, lives a single life, and then either attains God or damnation. The inquisitive thinker might then ask, how can something that is created and thus contingent exist eternally? Does not creation imply eventual destruction? According to the Vedic account, the soul, being a very part and parcel of God himself, was never created and can never be annihilated. Since it is the eternal Lord himself from whom we are expanded, naturally our fundamental constitution is the same as his, although in minute form. If the Lord is beginningless, endless, and blissful, then so too are we at our core. In fact, it's only because of misidentification with this material body that we think ourselves finite and subject to things like birth and death. Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur expands on this concept when he asks us to consider when a person grieves for a lost loved one, what is it that's actually being grieved for? Is it directed toward the physical body, which is in fact gone nowhere? This can't be the case because the body still remains. How can I grieve for the loss of something that's still sitting right there? On the other hand, the Atma, or the soul which is departed from the body, is also not the object of grief, since it's eternal and not capable of being harmed in any way. Thus, grief is recognized to be the product of ignorance only. Understandable ignorance. Ignorance that we're all dealing with to one degree or another until we've reached that state of perfection, but ignorance nonetheless. And Ramanuja reminds us that our oneness with the Lord, that is the result of our being expansions of him, should not be mistaken to imply that there's no difference between us and the Lord. Krishna uses the words I, you, and us in this verse to demonstrate that the soul is and remains eternally an individual unit. And so although we are expanded from him, that expansion is understood as eternal rather than happening at a particular place in time. Krishna's given us a lot to think about, so we're going to end here for this week. Stay tuned next time as Krishna begins to explain the concept of reincarnation and how this eternal soul appears to be appearing in many different bodies through time. Thanks for your time and attention, and until next week, Jai Shri Radhe.